Hey, everybody. How are we? Thank you guys so much for joining us. We're super excited to be able to have a special guest, Allison McMillan, today. Before we hop on to get to know her a little bit more and what she has to talk to us about, we're excited just to learn more about you, Allison. So first, we were joking a little bit before we hopped on. We're recording live from the sun, both of us in our yellow rooms. And so, Allison, tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you're going to be talking to us about today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Allison McMillan. I am a fractional VP of engineering. So what that means is that I work with startups who sort of need someone who's great at solving those early scaling problems, the problems that folks are just starting to run into with their engineering teams. And they need someone who's been a VP of engineering before and who has that perspective. But maybe they don't quite have the budget or the scope to need someone like that full time. I also do engineering leadership consulting. So I help teams by planning really amazing offsites and also doing engineering team health assessments. As a fun fact, I used to work at GitHub. I ran the coding department, which was pull requests, repositories, code spaces, and a handful of other areas. And then I live in Washington, D.C., and I'm a University of Michigan alum. So go blue if
Oh,
there are
go
any
blue.
alumni on here.
Awesome. Well, a couple of things we heard there. So she knows what she's talking about. She has run GitHub for a number of years in the engineering department, and she has been an engineering leader at a lot of early stage startups. So perfect to have you on to talk about the topic today, which is decoding 5 traits of successful engineering teams. You've seen it, you've been a part of them, you've led them. So let's hop right in. I'm super excited to hear more about it, and I'm going to pass it to you.
Yeah, fantastic. And thank you so much for having me. I really love talking about this topic because engineering it's just a little bit different, right? There's no one metric like lines of code or points shipped or anything. All of these different metrics, they need context, they need understanding to them, and really like to get at how an engineering team is doing and what the really successful traits are. You have to look at all these different metrics and sort of how they play together. There's quantitative, there's also a lot of qualitative in these sort of successful traits of engineering teams. I'm going to talk a lot about qualitative things that you can observe within your teams. And it's harder to assess because it's not as clear cut. You can't just look at deals made or other very sort of straightforward metrics like you can for other departments and other teams.
Awesome. And you know what? Before we continue to go on, I forgot to mention at the very beginning, as you guys are hopping in on the right hand side, you'll see that if you have any messages that you want to send out as far as questions, things like that, we'll get to them either periodically at the very end. So please feel free to drop any questions that you might have or commentary, and we'd love to hear what you guys are thinking as we go throughout. I'm
Yeah.
going to hop to that first of the 5 traits and tell us a little bit more about healthy turnover. What are you looking for here?
Yeah, so this one is a successful trait as a team that has healthy turnover. So there's a couple of different aspects in thinking about healthy turnover. The first one is how likely is it that you'll have turnover and what happens when you do? So successful teams have low turnover. They don't have no turnover. I actually think that no turnover whatsoever is an indicator of maybe not a healthy team. But they have low turnover and they have really effective knowledge sharing.
So you said something that I think is really interesting. I'd love to hear a little bit more about it. You said an indication of maybe a not so healthy team is no turnover whatsoever. So what do you mean by that? What kinds of things would you see if it was no turnover whatsoever, and what kinds of things should you be thinking as an engineering leader if that's what you're seeing?
Yeah, so no turnover. Maybe everybody's thrilled, everybody's fine, everybody's great. But frequently, if there's no turnover, it could mean that people feel stuck, but they don't want to move on. It could be that people aren't getting effective feedback. And it could also be that individuals feel like they either have to stay at the company or the company feels like somebody has to stay there because they're the only person who knows so much about a specific area of the code base or of the process or whatnot. So there are a couple of ways that you can sort of spot whether or not you have a process for healthy turnover. One is, and it again goes to sort of like knowledge sharing and how likely it is that you'll have turnover, that people will leave. So for the how likely it is that people might leave, some things that you can look for are like unclear expectations. Unclear expectations for an individual as to what standards they're being held to, how they know if they're doing a good job in their role or not. An unclear understanding from an individual on the impact of their work or their behavior on the greater company. Right? So, especially at earlier stage companies, but really at companies of any size, people want to know that the work that they're doing matters. They want to know that the initiatives that they're taking part in, the company culture that they're doing, that those sorts of things are important. And if somebody doesn't have an understanding of that, and it's not really easy to help communicate that to them, they're less likely to feel fulfilled in the role that they have, and they're more likely to leave the company for a different opportunity. And then I'll just go one more. For effective knowledge sharing, one of the ways that you can spot that is if there is one person that is like the go-to person for all of the fixes in a specific area.
Okay. So all awesome information. I'm looking again at like the 5 traits that you have on here, and it says healthy turnover. And the question that I asked was around 0 turnover at all. And so is there like a turnover rate, if you will, that's like maybe a healthy amount of turnover? Like what do you think about that?
Ooh, that's a great question. I don't know if there's sort of a rate or a percentage. I mean, obviously it depends on the size of your team. You know, a healthy turnover for an engineering team of 30 is going to be different than a healthy turnover for an engineering team of 3. You know, I think that it's what structures are being put in place to retain people. And then again, when folks turn over, you know, making sure that the reason why they're leaving feels like the right reason, feels like a good reason. And then when they do leave, making sure that there's not a scramble, there's not, you know, that you have effective knowledge sharing, that no one engineer feels like they have so much of the company on their back, sort of thing.
Cool. And one of the things that I think about as well is like when you eventually have that turnover, you know, do you utilize exit interviews to help kind of with the turnover, the healthy turnover, knowledge sharing or understanding of why they're leaving? How do you think about exit interviews and how you use those?
Yeah. Definitely using exit interviews is really great. It can really help identify trends of why people are leaving, or fill in the gaps of things that you might not be seeing. Whoever's sort of doing those exit interviews. You know, I think that some questions that someone can ask themselves, and I'll again talk about sort of the retention piece for a minute as opposed to the sort of knowledge sharing piece. But for that retention piece, things that frequently come up in exit interviews are things like, do written expectations of any kind exist,
Mm.
right? Or like, do managers or the manager, whoever is managing the engineering team, do they have a good idea of how individuals' performance differs from one another, right? And I'm not talking about number of pull requests or lines of code. I'm talking about things like how they collaborate together, how they communicate together. Are they tackling technically difficult problems, or technically difficult problems that are appropriate for their experience level, and what that looks like for the team as a whole, right? And not just sort of saying like everyone seems fine and the only feedback that folks get is like keep doing what you're doing. I think that's really that's really challenging for individuals. And then the last piece can be like, are there performance reviews of any kind, right? It doesn't have to be a heavy lift. It doesn't have to be a whole, full, robust system. But I think for individuals, for retention, feedback is really, really important. It's really important that folks feel like they're growing in their careers, and like they know what the next challenges that they're going to look at, or how what they're doing well, and what's a stretch for them, or what's something that they have to work on.
Awesome. So we're off to a strong start. The 5 traits of successful engineering teams, and of course, that first one being healthy turnover. So awesome. What is that second one, that second trait we should be looking out for a successful engineering team?
So the second trait is good code review quality. So what is good code review quality? And I feel very strongly about this, as you know, I'm biased because I help do a lot of sort of GitHub pull request stuff. But this is that pull request reviews of code that are effective and productive. So why this is important is that it's more than just code review. Code review is one piece of it, but pull requests and code review at its heart is about collaboration and communication. It's about learning, and sort of related to healthy turnover, it's about knowledge sharing, right? Yes, it's about shipping less bugs and making sure that you're creating maintainable code, but a successful team will communicate collaboratively and constructively through code review, which leads to greater learning, and then of course less bugs and more maintainable codes. It's sort of like the definition of what good code review quality looks like.
Okay. So when you think about code review, what's a good frequency for code review?
Ooh, a good frequency for a code review. I mean, I think that I'm going to talk about cycle time a little bit later.
Okay.
But I think that as pull requests are put up, engineers shouldn't be waiting days to get their code review, to get their code reviewed and to get their code looked at. I think one of the things that I do to sort of like assess code review quality, or see what's going on, is every week I will pull up just a handful of random pull requests that are in different areas of the code base, and I'll just sort of look through and see what's going on, right? There are tools that can give you metrics on like pull request, who's doing pull request reviews, comment numbers, things like that. But I also like to look at the number of comments on pull requests, right? So is it just like a thumbs up, looks good to me, ship it, or is there actual conversation in there? I like to look at the tone of those comments. I like to look at sort of individuals that are reviewing the pull request, right? How many people review it? How many required people are needed? How many additional people review? Who they are? Is it the same person who's always reviewing the pull requests? Those are some, but I think good teams really like everyone makes time and space in their calendar daily to sort of hop on and do pull request review code, and they review code really thoughtfully.
Have you ever had an experience as an engineering manager or an engineering leader where some of the commentary wasn't as kind of robust during a code review? And if you have, kind of how do you pull that kind of conversation out so that you can start to get a team that's a little bit more locked in with each other and having those conversations?
Yeah. So there are a few ways that code reviews can be, I'll say, like, can go awry or can be not as helpful. The first is very little comments, right? Like the looks good to me with the ship it, and where that is not an issue when it's here and there, or when it's just on a few pull requests. But when that's the regular cadence and sort of what you can expect to see on a code review from your whole team, that's, in my opinion, usually problematic. It's not enough. It's not enough to learn. It's not enough to really sort of understand. On the flip side, there can also be too many comments where a pull request, where a code review ends up going into like a rewrite, an entire, like, let's try a different technical implementation where there's just so much, there that it's really hard to, parse and it's hard to figure out. And it's probably better at some point to sort of take that conversation elsewhere. This can also, one of the questions that I sort of like to look at and ask is there bias in the code review process? For example, does one person usually get a whole lot of comments and really sort of like piled onto, whereas somebody else always gets like, looks good to me with a thumbs up? That's just an important thing to note in team dynamics. And then in between too many comments and too few comments, there's also ambiguous comments. So where the code review will be good and will be solid, but where it's really hard for the person who submitted the pull request, the person reading the code review, to get a good sense of which of those comments are like nitpicks or suggestions, or you might consider doing this way, and which of them are like, no, this really has to change. Like this needs to be addressed before this pull request ships. And that's sometimes really challenging, especially for less experienced developers. But I think for developers, for engineers at all levels, it's really challenging to look through a code review and tell like, okay, what's my priority order in addressing these comments and addressing this feedback.
Okay. So what, if any, like good code review quality, right? And so what, if any, of the things that you're doing as a part of that code review is I'm sorry, lost my train of thought there. Automated.
Oh, okay. I was going to say,
so
I can talk a little bit about best practices.
Yeah, well, we'd love to hear that. Maybe if you want to touch on like if there's an automated part or automated tools to use for good code review, then yeah, maybe some best practices as well.
Yeah, I think that every team has its own style. There are a few features in GitHub. There's a round robin. There's you can create sort of reviewer teams so that either one individual or multiple individuals will get pinged when a pull request is ready for them to review. I mean, that's great, especially as you have larger teams with more pull requests going into the same repository. So there are ways to sort of configure notifications or use labels, or a variety of different ways. There's also draft pull requests, which are great for getting again, like, instead of waiting till a pull request is completely up, if you're sort of curious about a technical discussion, or is this approach right, or am I moving in the right direction, or does somebody have early feedback, draft pull requests are a really great place to go for that. So yeah, so there are a variety of tools that sort of make it easier for you to know when a pull request is ready to review and gets your attention. In terms of best practices, I think the number one thing is, are folks leading from a place of curiosity, right? Are they people do the best work that they can with the knowledge that they have at that time. And that's the beauty of teams, is that people come with different knowledge, with different backgrounds, with different experiences, with different things that they've seen work and not work at different places. And so, when people come to a code review from a place of curiosity and really lead with that, I think that's so important, because it means that the phrasing is less, I don't understand why you did this, that you should do this instead, and more, I'm curious why you took this approach, or have you thought about X? Sometimes it's, here's a blog post about it, or here's a similar pull request that might be great for you to look through. Again, using good code review as a way to communicate and collaborate and learn and knowledge share.
Awesome. So again, we're talking about the 5 traits of successful engineering teams. We talked through the first one, which is healthy turnover, and second one, which is good code review quality. Let's hop on to the third one.
All right. The third one is prioritization clarity. So this is a clear understanding by engineers of what work to prioritize and why. So a successful team will understand how to prioritize work effectively and where to go for escalations or clarity. The reason why this is really important is because there are lots of information inputs that come to engineers. There's tech debt, there's customer requests, there's product features, there's bugs. There is also often sideways requests from leadership or sales or other people that go into the GMs and are sort of hidden. And when engineers, so this isn't just that engineers have prioritized work, but it's that they also really understand more of what work to prioritize and why. Because when engineers don't know how to understand those different streams, all of that information is coming to them anyway, and they end up bouncing between too many things and losing so much time to context switching.
So not to tease a little bit, but I know this one as well as the next one are things not just for successful engineering teams, but for successful teams and even just working in total. So prioritization quality. I know there are no side leadership DMs coming in. That never happens, right?
Never.
So when you've got that as a reality of like, that just happens, right? So how do you kind of protect your engineers from prioritizing those things inaccurately, or how do you have them communicate to you when these additional requirements are being added, and then how do you recalibrate your prioritization?
Yeah, that was a bunch of questions. We might have to take those one at a time. I think first and foremost, I always have my teams and departments do two things. One, they understand where to go for escalations, right? So if a new thing hits them, or if they see something in a different channel and they think that we should be prioritizing it, they know what that escalation looks like. They know what that process looks like. So that's first and really important. The second piece that's really important is that I always really push folks to, if they get a DM or a direct message or whatever, that they really encourage whoever is messaging them to take it to a public channel. So this is obviously, more for remote distributed teams, but conversations need to be visible, right? I think that the worst outcomes happen when there are a whole lot of sort of private or hidden conversations that happen, that then result in maybe a change in course or a change in priority. And frequently, the way that managers or engineering leaders find out about this is through like a stand-up update, when people mention the things that they're working on and something seems like there's a surprise there, or something seems sort of like it came out from left field, and then you touch base with that engineer, with that individual, and you figure out like, okay, why is this on your plate? How did that happen? Blah, blah. And again, it frequently comes through sort of like, oh, I saw this thing and I wanted to work on it, or I got a direct message from so-and-so, and they said it was the highest priority thing that we could and should be working on right now. So, I think that I know that answered at least one of your questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So that was number 3. So of the 5 traits, we've gone through the first 3, and number 3 being prioritization clarity. I teased this one. Oh, go ahead, please.
I just want to add a few more
more
things about prioritization clarity, because there are other places that you can also see it, and other metrics that you can look at, and questions that you can sort of ask as you're trying to assess this and figure it out. So aside from stand-up updates, or a change in course after a private conversation, you can also frequently see this through like repeated questions or repeated confusion. As a leader, it's important that you say it again, and then say it again, and that it's, posted in a few different places to make sure that you're really communicating effectively. But if you keep getting questions, or your managers or others, if they keep getting questions asked about how to prioritize something, or if there's confusion, it means that it isn't quite clear enough, it isn't digestible enough, and it isn't sort of straightforward enough. So it's a good sort of indicator to look at what's going on with prioritization clarity. And the other piece is delayed ships. So things that should ship frequently get delayed. Sometimes it's because of technical complexity. I think frequently it's because a person or a team or whatever they're pulled onto something else. They are asked to do a small task, or an individual engineer is sort of balancing multiple things. And what ends up happening is ships get delayed because of unexpected scope, because of unexpected priorities coming in. And sometimes those things sort of happen silently, where there's no flag raised. There's no like, hey, FYI, I'm doing this big thing, but I'm also doing these 3 small things. And as a result, this ship is likely to be delayed, or just, make it a yellow instead of a green sort of thing. Some questions is, again, I mentioned stand-ups, like, are you surprised by some of the things that your engineers are talking about that they're working on? You can also look at how many tickets is a single engineer working on at once. Hopefully you have some sort of visibility into the work and what's on everyone's plate. And if somebody has 4, 5, 6, 7 things with their name on it, that is usually a good indicator that there's some lack of prioritization clarity there. And then the final thing that I'll mention is how are prioritization shifts handled, and how are they communicated? Priority shift, especially in early stage companies. You're doing this, and then you really need to focus on this. And so you put thing A down to pick up thing B. And, once thing B ships, you'll go back to thing A. That's fine. But in order to make sure that there is clarity on prioritization, what work to prioritize and why, again, getting to this why piece, it's really important that those shifts come with communication, and that people sort of understand why things are happening. It also relates to healthy turnover, right? Again, if people don't feel the impact of their work, if they feel like things are just sort of everywhere all at the same time, it's going to lead to a more frustrating day to day for them, and they're going to be less productive.
Awesome. No, thank you for the extra context. I think, and when moving on to the next one, so prioritization clarity to this next one, healthy team dynamics. You mentioned a lot of things that also carry over to this as well. So tell us a little bit more about healthy team dynamics, and how that is the 4th of the 5 traits for successful engineering teams.
Yes.
Again,
okay.
for many teams across the board as well.
Yeah. And this one is, I will say, like, this one is probably the chunkiest one to talk about, which balances well, because the last one is probably the shortest one to talk about. So healthy team dynamics. A successful team will have fun, and they'll also communicate effectively and inclusively. So what healthy team dynamics means is it is a team's interactions with one another. And it includes all of the ways that teams interact. It includes verbal communication, written communication, meeting dynamics. There are a lot of sort of unspoken or hidden dynamics that happen within teams. And so this is also, I will say, it's the trickiest one to decode without a bunch of practice doing it. So if you're like, how do I tell these things? You just have to practice, and you'll get there eventually. But yeah, I mean, I think it's really important, before I talk about sort of like metrics and how to spot it and questions to ask. It's important because people stay at companies where they enjoy the teams that they're working on. They enjoy the individuals that they're working with. These connections can happen through really concentrated events like offsites or onsites, but they also happen every day through these mini and micro interactions that your team have with one another, through the ritual ceremonies that engineers take part in, through Slack banter, and also through like really critical work conversation. And this healthy team dynamics in particular is probably also the most amplified for remote or distributed teams. So if you have a remote or distributed team, it's even harder to assess, and it's also like that much more important.
Absolutely. I've got maybe a selfish question for me, because I used to be a technical project manager. So I would help to do projects for other teams, which involved engineers. And the working with engineers, sometimes I've had teams where they're receptive to that outside project management and help, and sometimes not. How does like a healthy team dynamic within the engineering organization or that engineering team kind of translate to cross-functional work?
Yeah. I think that it's making having welcoming conversations, creating space, uh, paying attention to things like how many public messages are there versus private messages in Slack, making sure that healthy conflict resolves successfully and that it resolves in the right place, right? Is it in Slack? Do you take it to a video? Do you take a break and then come back to a discussion? What does that look like? I think that if a team has a really healthy communication dynamic and they're treating each other respectfully, and they feel like everybody on the team feels like anyone can ask questions. They thoughts are welcome and included. There's sort of fun team banter, etc. It's going to automatically spread to anyone who sort of joins that team and is part of that team in a cross-functional way, as long as they bring that same energy. That's also really important. You can sometimes have a team that has a really good dynamic, and then somebody comes with like very different energy and they're trying to do something with that team, or they're trying to, and it just doesn't feel right.
Doesn't feel good.
It also can frequently like change the team's dynamic, each individual interacts with that new person coming in. There are sort of like 4 stages of group or team development: forming, storming, norming, and performing, as they're called. And every time that a team gains someone or loses someone, the team itself goes through all 4 of those stages again.
Yeah.
Sometimes those stages are shorter or longer, but like every new person that's added or subtracted, you have a new team.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of those metrics that you had referred to that might lead you to kind of understand more about your team dynamics and how healthy they are?
Yeah. So this, it builds a little bit on code review quality. So I would say in addition to sort of like code reviews and seeing what that looks like, you can look at how communication happens in Slack. You can look at communication in meetings. You can look at, I mentioned public versus private messages, healthy conflict. A good one is who talks, who listens, and who answers questions. How do folks contribute to conversations, either when it's happening or after the fact, right? And so that's, is there space for both introverts and extroverts to contribute to conversations, and do both groups feel comfortable doing so? You can also use that same sort of look for that same dynamic with earlier career and later career folks, right? Folks that are less experienced and folks that are more experienced. Does everybody feel like they have a place at the table and the ability to contribute? And are they comfortable doing that? Are people talking over one another? That's a really good one to just sort of keep an eye on. Are there fewer individuals who tend to dominate conversations? And then the last one that I think is really interesting is, do things feel different with the team when it's like small group verbal communication versus written communication versus in meetings and various different kinds of meetings. So that can really frequently be an indicator of like spaces where people feel more or less comfortable, and and maybe it's not a big deal, but recognizing those dynamics of like, oh, people talk a bunch in Slack, but when we get into a meeting, like nobody ever says anything. Again, maybe not a big deal, but there might be some really interesting dynamics at play there that you really need to sort of like think about, address, figure out why, right? Is it introverts versus extroverts? Is there an additional comfort level thing? Is it, yeah,
Okay.
all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. Awesome. Before kind of moving on to the next one, any kind of last minute thought in it, team dynamics? Maybe some best practices on how to keep them.
Ooh, best practice on how to keep them. I mean, call out both like individually and for the group, like when people are doing this well, right? Like when really healthy conversations happen, when shout outs to one another, right? A really healthy culture of people sort of recognizing one another and giving that credit. Or when somebody, let's say, like shouts at one person and that one person knows that they worked with two other people, if that one person is like, oh, I worked with this person and this person actually to accomplish this, right? Calling those things out and championing the things that are going well, while you probably have some things that aren't going well. And so like talking to individuals one-on-one really frequently, again, this is getting back to the feedback thing about turnover, right? Making sure that people know what their impact is on the team if maybe they have less healthy communication styles or less healthy dynamics.
Awesome. And so that was number 4, healthy team dynamics. And like I said, about 3 and 4, which is prioritization, clarity, and healthy team dynamics. Those are important no matter what kind of team you're working with or working for, whatever company. Those are super, super helpful tips. So thank you for going through those. And the last one, the last of the 5 traits for a successful engineering team is
low cycle time. Okay, this one's like the most straightforward to explain. So it'll take us the least amount of time to chat about. This one's really straightforward. It is the amount of time from when work gets started to when work is shipped to production. The reason why I think this is, and it's not the only metric that you should look at. I know I said at the beginning, there's no one metric, and there is no one metric. The reason why this one is helpful and a low cycle time is a good trait of a really successful and healthy team is that a successful team uses cycle time as a way to recognize the bottlenecks that are in their system from getting started to shipping to production, and they work to solve those issues.
What other metrics, in addition to low cycle time, I guess, are good indicators for a successful engineering team?
Ooh, I mean, like I said at the beginning, right? I don't love talking so much about sort of like quantitative metrics. There's like you can look at sort of like pull request comments, you can look at, and there are a couple of tools that do this, like Linear B does this, Code Climate, I think Jellyfish. Like there are a few that you can just sort of like hook into your system, and it will give you a nice dashboard that will tell you cycle time, that will tell you a little bit about maybe where the most, if you label your pull request as sort of features, bugs, etc. It'll give you a little bit of visibility into that. But I really think like cycle time is the best way to be able to tell what parts of the process are frictionful and slow and bottlenecks, and which gives you the ability to dig into why and to solve those.
Awesome. Well, Allison, we've got about 5 minutes left. And one, I want to say thank you for coming to join us. Super helpful for not only just our individual developers, but our startups that are a part of our program. So just with this 5 minutes, I want to give you the time to, one, maybe do a quick debrief of what those 5 traits are, just as we leave, and then also tell us a little bit about what you do on your spare time right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so in summary, those 5 traits are healthy turnover, good code review quality, prioritization clarity, healthy team dynamics, and low cycle time. So here's what I'll say. And Alex, you can throw that last slide up. Yeah, thank you. So figuring out how to build a team that has these traits is difficult. It's difficult to put these traits and habits in place with an existing team. And it is difficult to figure out and assess all of the pieces of the puzzle, right? I probably threw out 50 different questions during this session of like things that you can look at, ways that you can spot, ways that you can assess. And that was for five traits. So I would love to help. Again, I'm an engineering leadership consultant. I help companies by providing engineering team health assessments, by coming in as a fractional VP of engineering, and also by planning really fun and effective offsites that are a great way to accelerate getting to these traits successfully with your team. So you can use this QR code or my email address, website. Feel free to book a free consultation on my site. And if you can't find a time that works for you, feel free to email me and let me know. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome, Allison. And before I let you go, we're going to ask one more question, maybe 2. We'll do an engineering related question, a non-engineering related question, because we want to get to know you a little bit as well. So from the engineering side of things, what is maybe the craziest story you've had in regards to one of these 5 traits, whether it's like a team that didn't quite get along and you had to kind of reel it back in? Maybe it was like a cycle time that lasted 2 or 3 times longer than it was supposed to be, and all the different kind of intricacies that went in with that. Just maybe one that's kind of centered around one of those.
Yeah, I think prioritization clarity. I mean, when I ran repositories, pull requests, and code spaces, like I will say repositories specifically, that is a huge piece of GitHub that all millions of people use every day. And there is just, there's so much, and pull requests also, right? There's so much that can be done in that area. There's so much that can be done for different customers and different users. There's different people in leadership have different opinions on, and so it was just like, that was probably the place where we had to get prioritization and escalation like down the most, because there were just so many things to prioritize all the time. And, with any engineering team, you can only do as many things as you have the people and the ability to do. So yeah, that's why I love talking about prioritization clarity, because I have lived it very intensely in that way.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And then the last one is, you work hard. We want to know where your next vacation is going to be, or maybe like your dream vacation. Tell us about what's next.
Ooh, okay. So I'll do dream vacation and next vacation.
Okay.
They're actually sort of similar, but in very different ways. So next vacation, I have 2 kids. We are doing a family vacation to the Adirondacks at the end of the summer. We went last summer for a week, and it's beautiful up there. We hike in the morning, we eat ice cream in the afternoon. It is very, very chill, and just like a really wonderful time that doesn't involve me planning a whole lot of stuff and spending a lot of time and effort doing that. And then my dream vacation is to Patagonia. Again, just like so beautiful, so amazing. The pictures are just, I feel like every time I see pictures from Patagonia, they're just wild. And again, just like beautiful hikes, beautiful things to do. So that 100% would be my dream vacation.
Awesome. And just a small bonus question: that trip to Patagonia, are your kids going to go, or do they stay home?
No.
There you go.
They will stay home. I mean, like,
no.
they're young right now. So maybe ask me in like, maybe in 10, 15 years, they can come along with me. But right now, no. Right now, they are not coming.
Well, Allison McMillan, thank you again for joining us. As she said, we've got the QR code up here. Book a free consultation. Check her out on her website. or shoot her an email at allison@allisonmcmillan.com. Thank you again for joining us. Again, these were the 5 traits of successful engineering teams, and we were happy to have you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.